Right now, a lot of you kids out there can't go to school. When I was in high school, my last year of grade 13, principal called me into his office one day and he said, "You got the wrong attitude. Leave the school today, you'll starve in 2 weeks." Well, how was I going to know if I didn't leave? So I left. Had no money, no prospects. This was in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario. Thought I had a friend in Toronto. Came here, discovered I didn't. So I arrived here homeless and penniless and friendless, the whole 9 yards. And I've not done too bad. And I've met a whole lot of amazing people that I couldn't have met and would not have met had I not walked out of that man's office that moment. In fact, right from the start, I've met some extraordinary people. I'm going to tell you about one of them right now. And that man's name was Aronowitz. Now, who was he? Well, I first read about him in the Soho News in 1981, and I read that he had been a reporter for the Saturday Evening Post who was sent down to Greenwich Village to write what's called a hatchet piece on a bunch of crazy young men who smoked pot, spouted poetry, and flashed switchblade knives. And he had been sent down there because his editor's kid, his editor's son, was hanging out with these people. He didn't like them, and Al was a crime reporter, and he figured that Al would write a piece that would get the cops on their ass. See, he sent Al down to make trouble for him. And Al said that he walked in, and for the first time in his life, he recognized he was in the presence of living poets. So instead of writing a hatchet piece, Al wrote the first positive press about Jack Kerouac, Allen Ginsberg, and William S. Burroughs. And if you don't know who those people are, then you're sadly lacking in information about the most important writers, one of the most important writers of the 20th century. And then Bob Dylan came into Al's life by chance, and well, Bob Dylan wasn't anybody then, you know? He was just some crazy kid. In fact, I met another person way before I met Al who was instrumental in the life of Bob Dylan. And that person was Jane Jacobs, the author of The Death and Life of Great American Cities, which is the most important book you can read on cities. Jane Jacobs, The Death and Life of Great American Cities. Look her up, get her book, read it more than once, think about it. And she came to Toronto in 1968 to keep her sons from being turned into hamburger in Vietnam. And Mrs. Jacobs was walking along the streets of Toronto, and she saw, guess what, a street poster I put up for a showing of the original silent Lon Chaney 1923 version of The Hunchback of Notre Dame. And the day they came to my shows, it was a rainy Saturday, and I thought, nobody's coming up. It's been raining all day. I thought, well, you better go. And my venue then was called The Public Enemy, because as Henry Miller wrote in his essay, An Open Letter to Serialists Everywhere, whenever an English artist of any value has arisen, they've always been seen as public enemy number one. So I started off on the right foot right away. And I get there, and it's raining out, and I see this woman, older woman, and her husband, and, well, not that old, and their two sons and their daughter. And they came, and the first thing Mrs. Jacobs said was, "This is just like Cinema 16 in New York." And they came every week after that. And I knew them for a couple of years before I saw her picture in the paper. And I read the article under it and discovered she'd written this book called Death and Life of Great American Cities. So I read her book, and I've read it several times since then. And one day, and people say, well, we go to your shows, we have to listen to you. You know, what, can't you just shut up? And one day over a beer in her home, Mrs. Jacobs said to me, "The best part of what you have to offer is what you have to say." And I said to her in response, "Hearing that from you is better than getting an Academy Award." And she said, "I wouldn't say that." I said, "I would. I know the caliber of the people who vote on those things." And it is. It's way better than getting an Academy Award. And one writer, Laura Lind, in Eye Weekly said, "Red Chart Cineforum is everything Jane Jacobs wrote about." And what makes the Cineform everything that Mrs. Jacobs wrote about is the fact it's been under attack. I've been under attack in this city since flippin' 1968 when I got here, okay? So I know all about standing up alone, under attack. Well, not entirely alone. An awful lot of good people value the work I do, but some other people don't value that work at all, and they've been doing their best to make sure I get stopped. And their best is pretty energetic. But anyway, Mrs. Jacobs marched against the war in Vietnam. And there was a young fella sleeping on her couch. He was a songwriter, and she said, I need you to write protest songs for me. And he said, what's a protest song? And she taught him what protest songs are. And that young fella was Robert Zimmerman, who became better known to the world as Bob Dylan. So there's two major people of the 20th century, three of them, come into my life. Now, I've never met Bob Dylan, so I'm not even eager to meet Bob Dylan because Bob Dylan lives in his own world. I live in mine. If we meet by chance, that would be fun. But, we got to be our own heroes, He's a great singer, a great songwriter, and the man is a hero. No argument there. We have to be our own heroes. And Al meets Bobby Zimmerman and says, come with me. And introduced Bobby Zimmerman to Allen Ginsberg. And Ginsberg took one look at Bobby Dylan, and the two of them vanished for a long time. And they learned a lot from each other. So I'm reading this article about him, about L. Aronowitz, Soho News. I decided I would write him a letter. So I wrote him a letter. And he wrote me back. And he wrote me back again and again and again. And one day he wrote me a letter and he said, the new Messiah will tear up the money. Well, the money's being torn up as as you listen to me right now. It's going down the toilet. Well, the thing about this Messiah business is that each of us has to be the Messiah in our own life. We've had enough Messiahs, okay? Everyone thought Hitler was the Messiah, and look what he did. Well, he did what the Messiah people are waiting for are supposed to do. People are waiting for a Messiah who will separate the sheep from the goats, and the sheep he's going to invite into his kingdom, and the goats he's going to fry, okay? Hitler took all those people he thought was bad, and God knows there were a lot of them. I'd be included. You probably would be too. We know where they wound up. They wound up getting burned, This idea of a Messiah who's going to separate the righteous from the unrighteous and punish the wicked with eternal fire, I'm not really crazy about that idea, and I don't think anybody else should be either, all right? I think that's an idea we got to just say goodbye to. We have to become the Messiah in our own life. Now, I've read the Gospels through several hundred times, so I'm an authority on that. But we're talking about L. Aronowitz. So L. Aronowitz sent me this letter saying the new Messiah will tear up the money. And he had a book he published called self-published, called the Blacklisted Masterpieces of L. Aronowitz, and it cost $100. So I sent L $100 Canadian. And I said, I haven't got the heart to tear this up, but if you want to tear it up, go ahead. And he sent me back a copy of his book, which Canadian dollar is worth less than American money. So I got it at a discount. And Al wrote me back again, and I wrote him back. And I sent him the quote from the end of the Gospel of Mark about what we have when we trust in God. And one of the things we have when we trust in God is if people try to do evil to us, they won't be able to harm us. He said, if snakes bite you, they won't harm you. If someone gives you a cup of poison, it won't harm you. Now, some folks think snakes bite us means they can take a rattlesnake and they can have it bite them and to show that they have faith. No, that's not faith. That's tempting God. That's not faith at all. It's like when Jesus is told by Satan, And the word Satan means the accuser. I've said this before. And there's lots of people out there saying, my church is the true church, all those other churches are the false church. No, that church she's talking about, that church is full of holes. If you trust it, it's going to sink, and you're going to sink with it. That's the accuser speaking, so stay away from that person. And God knows there's a lot of accusers out there. That means if a snake bites you, it won't harm you, okay? And there are people, and it means people, lying people. The devil's called the great serpent. And there'll be liars out there that'll lie about you through their teeth. And let them lie. They're not going to hurt you, okay? All the water in the world can't get into a boat unless you drill a hole in the bottom of your boat. You know, you just stay calm, you'll be okay. And this is what was called for right now. Just stay calm, you'll be okay. And L called me up. He said, you're going to drink poison? I said, no, I'm not going to drink poison. That's just scripture. And I thought, my God, this is a man who actually cares. That's the rarest thing on earth, man, a man who actually cares. So then we started having regular conversations on the phone. And one day he's talking to me and he's pretty depressed. And I said, what's the matter? Al said, I've written a book and no one will give me a reading. I said, well, then come to Toronto. We'll do a reading here. At the time, my presentations were out of the Bathurst Street United Church. So I scheduled a reading for Al. He drove up. And he stayed with me while he was here. And we didn't get many people out, but we got a few. And he went back to New York, and he started giving readings all across America. Like, he just needed one to get him going. And he was great to hang out with, man. Great to hang out with. In fact, I took him one day for a walk. I didn't tell him where he was going. And I took him to visit Jane Jacobs. And she was thrilled to meet him. Al was thrilled to meet her. If you had told me, I'd have brought paper and taken notes. I said, no, that's why I didn't tell you. And these are my friends. These are two people who shaped the 20th century, man. And if I hadn't walked out of high school, I wouldn't have met them, you know? And I wouldn't have had Jane Jacobs say to me, the best part of what you offer is what you have to say. That's a hell of a compliment, you know? That's a hell of a compliment. So, you know, doesn't matter. Finally, you just got to learn to have faith in yourself. That's next to impossible. It's easier to believe in God than it is to believe in ourselves. You know, you want something tough, you start believing in yourself. And you don't have that belief in yourself, man, you're toast, because we are walking a hard path, and we are now sailing on a stormy sea. And you've got to believe that you have the power within you to withstand the worst the world can throw at you. In fact, I first read that, not in the Bible or whatever, but from an interview with Albert Schweitzer, who had served as a medical missionary in Africa. And the person interviewing him said, it's so good you're offering an alternative to the primitive medicines of these jungle witch doctors. And Schweitzer replied, there's no difference between me and them. We're both trying to convince our patient that the power to survive whatever the world throws at them lies in each person. And if we can do that, they'll live. If we can't do that, doesn't matter what we give them, they're going to die. Essentially, what we're trying to do is have them to have faith in themselves so that they can weather any storm. So I got, you know, I'm being hit with emails from these people saying, you got to buy our supplement. You got to buy our special product. You got to buy, you got to buy, you got to buy. No, you don't got to buy, okay? Did get some good advice from a video from a doctor in China at the center of all this stuff. And he said, first thing he said was, drink 3 slices of lemon in hot water. Drink 3 slices of lemon in hot water. 3 slices of lemon in hot water. I said that 3 times. I did that deliberately because it takes 3 times to sink in. Now, I have inherited from my father a big problem with catarrh and phlegm. Crap, snot, you know? So I started doing this. Started doing it Tuesday morning. Next thing you know, I have less of a problem with catarrh and phlegm. I can't believe it. Man, I wish I started doing this a long time ago, you know? So get yourself some lemons and get some hot water. Doesn't going to cost you a fortune. And have 3 slices of lemon and a cup of hot water. Just like this, just like I'm doing. That will do a lot more for you and cost you a hell of a lot less than spending hundreds of dollars you shouldn't be spending on someone's bogus product, okay? So then Al and I stayed in regular contact, and Now Magazine did a thing where they got a whole bunch of different poets and speakers to come to Toronto, and they brought Al up, and they put him up in an expensive hotel room. I can stay with Reg. And they said, no, we want to put you up in a hotel. It's part of our deal. So they did, but we hung out. And he went back to the States afterwards, and then, we stayed in contact. And Al called me up one day and says, I want to do a presentation in Toronto at your place. This is my favorite place in the world, is your place. I want to do a presentation. I said, sure, come on up. And then I asked one of my friends, Robert Fulford. Now, Robert Fulford is Canada's preeminent journalist. He's the man. And if I hadn't walked out of high school, I wouldn't have met him either, you see? And I said, I'd like you to welcome Al Aronowitz to Toronto. And Mr. Fulford said, well, send me his work. And I did. And he called me back and said, yeah, I'd be glad to do this. I made him an offer. I told him I was street poster for a book he had coming out free of charge. And we did a night at the Toronto Press Club, introduced by Mr. Fulford. Now, those Toronto Press Club people, they've seen everything, they've done everything. They're about as jaded as they can get. But when a god walks in, they pay attention. And Robert Fulford is one of the gods of Canadian journalism. So when Robert Fulford walked in and introduced Al Aronowitz, I got their attention. I got it big. And then we did some more nights here. Those were the fun nights. And it was amazing to watch Al working with young people. Because he'd been where they'd been, man. I mean, Al's wife died of cancer. And he wore himself out taking care of her. And he gets a phone call from Miles Davis. Now, Miles Davis didn't like white folks at all. And he had good reason not to like white folks. And in fact, if you pick one part of the human tree that's done its best to make the rest of the world have nothing but contempt for it, it's white folks. Now, it's not all white folks, let's make that clear. It's the rich white folks. But you know something? The rich black folks, the rich brown folks, the rich yellow folks, and if we had green folks, the rich green folks, those are the ones that seem to think that their shit don't stink. So let's make one thing clear. It's those rich folks sitting on the verandas passing judgment at the rest of the world. Those folks that are the problem. Because you go back to your Gospels, Jesus never said a hard word to a prostitute. We don't have the word homosexual for those times, but you can bet he wouldn't have said a single hard word to homosexual either. He doesn't say a hard word to working class folks trying to make a living for themselves. And he hangs out in public houses, taverns, drinking with sinners. Hard word for those folks. But as soon as he sees those folks that give those folks hell, you know what I'm talking about, he says, you walking pile of filth, you walking pile of shit, you robbers of widows and orphans, he just got no time for those folks at all. Those are the only folks that Jesus says, you repent or you're going to burn in hell. So you stop and go back there and you take a look there. And then you turn off those TV preachers, please, Spend your time doing something better. And Al called me up one day and he said, Reg, I want to do another presentation at your place. I didn't know he was dying of cancer. Well, he never did another presentation here. He died before he could do that. But his spirit lives here. So all I'm saying to all you people out there that are now floundering because you can't go to school, you're in the real school. You got all these Christian schools, Roman Catholic Christian schools, Church of England Christian schools, Baptist Christian schools, evangelical Christian schools. What does Jesus say? Jesus said, you have no need. He said, you got one teacher, God. When somebody asked him to be their teacher, he said, you got one teacher, God, okay? He said, I'm not your teacher. John in his first letter writes, you have no need that any, John 1:2-27, he writes, you have no need that any man should teach you. No need that any man should teach you. Now think about that. You have no need that any man should teach you. You know what? It takes faith to believe that. And if you got that faith, Henry Miller, in his open letter to Serialists Everywhere, writes, one man operating alone on faith can accomplish what an army, a trained army, cannot do. And that's true. One man operating alone on faith can accomplish what trained armies cannot do. One man operating alone on faith can accomplish what trained armies cannot do. So you look at that. Now, I talked about Miles Davis called up Al Aronowitz. He says, anything I can do for you? Al said, no, I'm okay. Miles said, well, I know something you need help with. And Al Aronowitz discovered that Miles Davis quietly paid the bill for his wife's funeral. Now, you got to be real special to earn that kind of love. And that was Al, you know. When the Beatles played Shea Stadium, Al Aronowitz was the only American journalist they would talk with. And Al brought along Bob Dylan to that little get-together. They'd never met. And he got to their hotel room, and Al discovered the Beatles had never smoked pot. So he puts a towel into the hotel room door and opens the window and turns them on, first time. So when you see the Beatles playing Shea Stadium, they're not playing their instruments, they're just out there playing to recording. They were so stoned out of their gourds, they couldn't have played their instruments. And they were so grateful they gave Al part of an album. Well, they all didn't do it. George Harrison did it. He was an extraordinary, beautiful man. And you can read all about him on the web. You can go to his site, The Blacklisted Masterpieces of Al Aronowitz. And I'm going to start reading from The Blacklisted Masterpieces of Al Aronowitz. And I'm going to start and keep this going. And right now, I have a lawyer who needs to be taken care of because someone's done me as much dirt as they could, and it's a big shovel that's going to take the... Now, I'm in trouble because I failed as a Christian. Yeah. I failed. I sinned. I missed the mark. What did I do? Well, this person's been doing me dirt for a long time, and this person's still doing me dirt. And I asked in prayer that it would stop. I didn't know that, no, you don't ask them to stop. You don't ask them at all to stop. When Jesus, the body of the man in the shroud, when he was being beaten to a pulp by those Romans, he didn't say, stop, please, it hurts. He didn't say a word. He suffered them in silence. And I sinned. I asked for it to stop. And the man filed a complaint with me with the police, and the police officer called me up and said, this man says you're threatening him. You know, Satan, the great liar. And the police officer, very good man, did a little web search on me and said, oh my God, look at your history. Give me more information on this. What's been going on here? And he gets the information, and he finds out he did his homework. That's a rare thing. And he says, do you want to file charges? I said, no, please. I just wanted to stop. See, that was my sin. I just wanted him to stop. Should never have done that. And the officer got concerned. He says, there must be a way to stop this. So he looked it up and he found out, everybody else had told me that there's nothing they could do. He looks it up and he finds out that this falls under criminal harassment. He can be charged with criminal harassment. He says, you want me to charge him? I said, no, I just want this to stop. So he gives him the message that he could be charged with criminal harassment. He says, I'm not doing it. So I go out one day, I saw him go by my house, and I saw him, with a bag of paper in front of his bike, and I grabbed my camera, the camera I'm using right now, and went down to Queen Street, and I filmed him for over half an hour, putting this stuff up, and showed it to the cop. He said, okay, now it's no longer he said, this is the hard proof that we needed. Do you want me to charge him? I said, no, I just want this to stop. So he did his best to stop it, and it didn't stop. And I was Toronto Film Festival, and he started putting up more posters targeting me. And I thought, enough is enough already, so I called the police, and they charged him with criminal harassment. And they let him go on condition he no longer possess or post anything, related to myself. And what I didn't know was I had put him in the one place where they had to listen to him. Lying or not, they had to listen to him. And they listened. Once they heard what he had to say, they had to investigate. And they came charging in here. And they're investigating. And I'm in the pot. And the first lawyer I had I just felt like I'm drowning at sea with this man. Lawyers won't speak ill of other lawyers. That's one of the things that they won't do. But a friend of mine told me to call this lawyer, Calvin Barry, and I called Mr. Barry. And the first thing Mr. Barry said, well, he's a good guy, but he's out of his depth on this, and I've handled lots of these cases. And come and talk to me right now, this moment. So I head down there, it's a Saturday, and I spoke with Mr. Barry, and he said, has he done this? He listed a lot of things, and he hadn't done any of that stuff. Mr. Barry said, well, I'm sorry to say this, but he may have bought braces for his kid, but he's not done a thing to help you. You're up the creek here, and the best thing you can do is get us on board right away, and we'll get all this changed around. And I need $3,000. I said, well, I haven't got $3,000. He said, well, I can't do a thing for you until you put down that $3,000. So he said, you go out there and see if you can raise it. I said, I don't think I can, but I can try. Well, I did, and whatnot, it came. The money came. So I got him on board. Now, before I did that, I made sure that I'm making the right move here. And I talked to the lawyer I had, and he finally spoke with me in private, and it was clear he hadn't a clue what to do. Huh? So you have no choice except to make that leap. Well, now I've made it. And this is justice system, Robbie Burns said, vain is the hope of them that trust in public morality, truth, and justice. Blah. Well, you discover that our justice system is not about justice. It's about a lot of things, but it's not about justice. A lot of good people out there doing a lot of good work. Don't get me for a moment thinking that I'm slamming them, because I'm not. They're just caught in a system that's a system. And systems chew people up. And so whatever. So if you want to help me with this particular thing, then you can just email me, reghart@gmail.com, and then you can send some money to my lawyer so he knows exactly where it's going. I don't want you sending it to me, because then you think, well, that man's using it for his own use. No, my lawyer's got to be, he's got to be taken care of, I mean, you may have a good dog, but if you don't feed it, your dog's going to starve. And I have 5 cats, and I'm taking care of them, and they're happy. They're cool cats. But essentially what I'm saying here is if you don't trust in yourself, okay, then you're going to flounder, and you're going to reach out for things that aren't going to do you any good. So don't go listen to those web preachers that tell you, here's our 20 scriptures Christians are ignoring. He's ignoring them. We're here to be brother and sister to each other. I started out to talk about Aronowitz and the blacklisted masterpieces of Aronowitz. And the thing, I got invited down to New York in the 90s to do a show at the Thalia Theater. The Thalia Theater is the only cinema in the world built as a rep cinema. It had an amazing seat arrangement where nobody's head would get in front. It was deliberately built as a rep cinema. And I got invited to go down there with my cartoon festival. And I was excited to do it because Seamus Culhane, who had animated at the Max Fleischer studio and at the Bray studio where animation began, And at the iWorks studio, Ub Iwerks, the guy who created Mickey Mouse for Walt Disney, and animated all by himself, the first three. And then Walt Disney himself, he worked on the highest sequence of Snow White, and worked on The Fox and the Cat and Pinocchio, and he worked at Warner Brothers, and he was still working. Had come to Toronto at my invitation and talked for a whole week about his career in animation. He was an amazing man. I'll talk about him later. And when I went down to New York, it was a chance because Seamus couldn't travel anymore. So it was a chance to honor Seamus Culhane in his home city, New York. I said, I'll do this, and I'll do what you want. He wanted me to do 7 shows in a day. So I'll do 6 shows, and the 7th show I want it to be a tribute to Seamus Culhane. And he said, fine. So I got there, and they got my name on the marquee. I said, yeah, I want you to take that name off. I want you to put the name Seamus Culhane up there. I had to do the same show 6 times in a row, which is a killer. Actually, I had to do it 7 times because that last show was the one with Seamus, but it was the same show. And people came for that first show, and some of them got up and told me what an asshole I was and stormed out. But most of them stayed. Not very many, but most of them stayed. And the second show, all the ones that stayed for the first show, plus most of the ones for the second show, except for the ones that called me an asshole, stayed for the third show. So when we got down to that last show, that place was packed. And it was full of people who'd been there from the first show on. I said, we've never seen anything like this, man. This is incredible. And I'm giving myself a little pat in the back here, but, this is what they said. And then I got up, and because Seamus, I carried the torch for Seamus. I introduced Seamus' work and talked about him. And the next day, I had Peter Sumad with me, the Mad Dalton, he's a great poet. I'll talk more about Peter later on. And Al Aronowitz introduced me to New York on that last show. And after the show was over, Al took me to the Blue Note. It was amazing watching all of these musicians come up to our table and tell what an honor it was to perform with him in the audience. He was the real deal. He was loved. And why was Al loved? Because the man was love personified, man. He was love personified. And Robert Fulford said to me, I'll be glad to introduce this man. He's a poet. I'll be glad to introduce this man. He's a poet. I'll be glad to introduce this man. He's a poet. And the best definition that I've ever got of a poet is a man who chooses the words he will live by. Al Aronowitz had a hard, hard life. Don't we all? But he chose the words he lived by, and the words he lived by are damn good words, So let us choose the words we'll live by during this present storm. It's going to be with us for a long time. But it will pass. It will pass. It will pass. God bless.